Hey, what's going on out there? I'm Sean Devine. Hope you all are doing well. In this video, I'm going to show you how to master your beats. Yes, that's right. I said master. We've talked a lot about mixing beats, about getting the most loudness out of your beat mixes, but I'm going to show you 3 simple processes that I utilize after every beat mix to ensure that we're getting the optimal sound, the optimal loudness, dynamics, tone, imaging out of our beats prior to posting them on your website or on your beat store, so that listeners and artists are going to be inspired. They're going to hear that your beats really compete. So I'm going to show you some new plugins today, but I'm also going to give you some alternates in terms of stock plugins, as well as plugins I know most of you have. So no matter what plugins you're using, I'm going to show you plenty of options to master your beats. So let's go ahead and dive in. All right, so let's go ahead and take a listen to my beat mix as is. Anything you see on the stereo bus right now or the master bus is disabled. And you're also going to notice that my stereo bus is clipping. Don't worry about that. I have the balance set the way I want to. Everything sounds the way I want it to. And we're going to address that here in just a second. All right, so that gives you a good idea of what we're working with there in my beat mix. Everything is balanced the way we want it, and we're jumping into mastering. Before we do that, the first thing we want to do is set up what's called a VCA fader. If you're not familiar with VCA faders, I have a video on gain staging that covers all this stuff in detail. I'll link that in the description that you can watch after this one. But let's go ahead and just select all of our beat tracks. And then we're going to go to our VCA section here, and we're going to create a new VCA. VCA stands for Voltage Controlled Amplifier, and essentially it just gives us an additional fader that's going to control all the levels for the faders that we just selected on the mixer, comparing to something like a group fader. Some of those don't react with things the same way. So this is the best way to do it, is just to set up a VCA so that when we bring this down, everything about our balance is going to stay the same. It's just going to bring all the levels back. So we're going to go ahead and just call that beat. Now we're just going to bring this back just so that we've got a little bit of headroom on the stereo bus. You notice that none of my individual tracks were clipping, so it's not like anything major was going on there, but we just want to make sure that we're not clipping the stereo bus at all, just so that we're going to optimize our master bus processing here. So I'll bring that back to -6, and let's go to the loudest part here. Okay, all good. So we're optimized for the processing, and this is also going to relate to exporting our multi-tracks. We'll talk about that at the end of the video. First process that we're going to utilize in terms of mastering your beats is to optimize the tone, or to utilize an EQ. And some of you are going to have to do more work in this regard than others in terms of how your mix is balanced. That's perfectly fine, but the great thing about utilizing EQ on the master is we can make very few moves, and it's going to make a big difference in terms of that tonal balance here. So let's go ahead and activate the AMEK EQ. This is a plugin from Brainworks and Plugin Alliance. I'm utilizing a trial, but I wanted to just let you all hear it. I've been really impressed. I'm also going to show you an alternate. So again, if you don't have this, don't worry about it. It's going to be the same approach. But let's go ahead and on our high pass filter, I just want to go ahead and filter out some of the extreme lows of the beat. Some of this stuff is just going to make our limiter or our maximizer work harder once we get there. So I'm going to park this at about 23 hertz, 24. Don't want to go, too far above that, because we don't want to cut out a lot of our extreme low end. And then I'm also going to go over to the low EQ, and I'm going to cut out some 200. Sometimes my beats just tend to have build up like right around 220 or so. So let's see if we can just dial that in up here, somewhere around in there, like maybe 225. And I'm just going to take out, maybe a dB. So important thing to note here when you're utilizing EQ, and this goes for EQ in any mix, even with vocals, it's a lot easier to make these moves after you've kind of drastically reduced or drastically boosted, whatever frequency band you're going to be controlling. You just heard me do that there. And again, that just makes it easier to identify which band or which frequencies we're focused on at that point. Next, we're going to head up to this first high EQ. Now, these controls on the other side, this is just left and right channel. I've linked them, so they do the same thing. You'll see they control on both sides. But for this EQ, and especially for beats, I want to cut out some of the mids just so that we create a little bit of room for the vocal, but it also helps deal with some harshness. If you have some buildup with various instruments there, this is going to help. So I'm going to put this probably 1.8K is pretty ideal actually. So I'll leave that there and let's bring that back some. I'm also going to narrow this Q so that we're not cutting, as much at this band. You'll see right here, if I go this way, it's going to be, a wider Q, meaning that we're going to be cutting more frequencies around that particular notch. But we actually want this to be very specific to that 1.8K. So I'm going to go ahead and make that a sharper Q. So just a slightly more pleasant sound there, a little bit of harshness taken out. Now let's go up to this high EQ. This AMEK has a great top end to it, but I'm going to go ahead and put this at somewhere around 14K. That's where I usually like to boost. If you get much higher than that, it's really just a lot of air. And if you go much lower than that, you can start to bring out some of the harshness. So I want to be careful of that. I'm going to leave the Q where it is, and let's bring this up. I hear a lot of you who are working on, lo-fi style beats, which characteristically don't have a lot of top end. They're not going to have, this crispness. So if you want to, adjust that and you want to give it more of like a tape lo-fi sound, I would recommend rolling off towards about 15K so you can hear what this does. Just a little bit more of a retro sound option there for you on the EQ that you can utilize. Now jumping over to the graphic EQ, vintage graphic EQ, this is a stock plugin in Logic. We're going to do the same thing that we just did with the AMEK, same approach. So I'm going to go ahead and deactivate the AMEK, and we'll go over here to the vintage EQ. I'm going to turn this on, and I'm going to utilize this tune control here to kind of set these notches to something closer to what we had with the AMEK. So if I turn that down to like -2, you're going to see that, oh, look at that. We get about a 225 notch, we get that 1.8K notch, and we get that 14K notch that we have on the AMEK. Very convenient there. We'll go ahead and start with the 223, bring that back. I'm actually a pretty big fan of these vintage EQs in Logic. They're quite good. On the vintage EQ, we have a output model, and so we can actually select one of these, the Tube EQ, Graphic EQ, or Console EQ. I'm gonna select the punchy, and we're just gonna bring the drive up just a touch to give us some of that saturation and some of that heat to the sound. So you can hear if I push it too much, we get some distortion, lose some of the low end, but just with a little bit, it gives it a nice roundness. Now I'm gonna leave the phase at natural just so that there's no delay in the video here. But just to note, if you set your phase to linear phase, especially in mastering, I just find that the result tends to be a bit more surgical, bit cleaner, so you can switch that over in your mastering process. But as far as tone, I think we are good to go, but I'm gonna disable that because we're gonna go back to the AMAC now, turn on this total harmonic distortion control. So I'm just gonna turn this up to -75. It's very subtle, but again, just gonna bring a little bit of perceived loudness and just some low level saturation there. The second process that we're gonna utilize for mastering your beats is to optimize the stereo image or to get the width of your beat mix to be polished and to be professional. So we have this nice stereo imaging section that, as far as I know, most of the Brainworx plugins have some kind of stereo width or imaging controls in them. They're very, very convenient here in mastering because you'll see we have a mono maker. So we're gonna turn that on, and what this will do is, depending on where we set this, whatever is below this frequency is going to be completely in mono. I get a lot of you asking how to anchor your low end in your beats so that you don't have weird phasing in the subs and all that. Very easy to do here. So we're just gonna set this to, right around 100 Hertz. If you want to have a more monocentric mix, you can go all the way up to 2K. Obviously for mastering purposes, I don't think you're going to want to go that high, but very flexible there. Now moving over, we have a one control stereo width that sounds really good, and it goes all the way up to 400%. Again, we're going to use this very subtly, but let's move over here and see what we can do. Just a nice little hug in terms of the width there, nothing too crazy. We definitely don't want to open it up that much because you could hear we lose a lot of the impact and the dynamics of our beat mix, but we want to make it a little bit more exciting. Now, if you don't have this EQ, we will take a look at one that I know most of you have, which is Waves Vitamin. We can dial something in very similar here by just adjusting the width across all of our bands. So I'm going to just up this. Now, as far as anchoring our low end, I'm just going to set this crossover to 100, and then we're going to drop this band and just completely mono out that. So it's just gonna hit a lot better on subs. All right, so the third and final process we're gonna take a look at for mastering your beats like a pro is a limiter or a maximizer. But we're gonna talk about some extra bells and whistles here on this particular plugin that make it very transparent and just retain your dynamics, which I can't stress that enough, that limiters and maximizers are not created equally. So while I'm going to show you two different options, and I use a handful of limiters and maximizers that I really trust with my dynamics. Some of them have a more glued sound, and depending on the style, they can really wreck your low end and your drums. But these two, I promise you'll be in good shape. So this is the Brainworx True Peak limiter. I'm going to go ahead and just park it just below 0 for the video. If you want to set it to like -1 for delivery, that's perfectly fine. But for a beat, we don't necessarily need to worry about this. You're not going to notice a huge sound difference in terms of pulling that down to -1 versus just below 0. I want to go ahead and just set a target. So we want to be competitive, right? We're competing with our level, so we'll do that. -10 LUFS is going to definitely compete, and we're not going to be pushing it too much where we're going to be losing a lot of dynamics and introducing distortion there. So let's leave that. And then we're going to just slowly bring up the gain until we start to see that target. All right, so that's putting us right at around -10, -9. We're gonna make some adjustments here. This XL control is really nice. It just adds some fatness and some thickness to the way that the limiter is processing. So I'm gonna bring that up as well. So you could hear after I brought that up, it did start to make the limiter sound a bit aggressive in terms of the gain. So I just brought that back down a little bit, but I do like what that XL control does there. Now going down to the tone control, we can kind of further optimize the way that the limiter is going to react by setting a high pass filter. And then we also have this foundation control, which acts almost like a tape bias. So if we go this way, it seems a little bit brighter. And if we go this way, it's a bit darker. So let me show you what that does. And I'm going to set the high pass filter just to 20. Gives us a very transparent, punchy sort of result there. So we'll leave that at 10. I'm going to leave the low pass filter as is, and then the channel link, the limiter mix. So if you wanted to kind of mix this in, you could, but in terms of mastering, we want to have that at 100%, and everything else is good to go. All right, the alternate for our limiter or our maximizer is the trusty L3 from Waves. This is the low latency version, which means you can track with it. It's just a versatile limiter and maximizer, transparent, and we can get that loudness without wrecking dynamics. The first thing I want to do is just set the profile to lean and mean. This is just the cleanest, most impactful one that I've found for most cases. And I'm going to set the out ceiling to just below 0. I'm going to adjust the release a little bit, but let's pull down the threshold and see what we can do here. Nice and clean, impactful, not wrecking my dynamics. Good to go there. Let's go ahead and compare that to the Brainworx limiter, just out of curiosity here. So I will disable the L3. Let's turn back on the BX. Now, when you want to deliver multi-track, so this is exclusive of, the 2-track, meaning like the tagged version or the WAV and MP3, that would have this mastering processing, or at least some of the tonal stuff. But for delivering your multi-tracks, you want to take all this off, and then we want to just create that headroom, which we did at the beginning. That's why we did that VCA. That now comes in handy because when we go to do the multi-tracks, all these tracks are going to be exported with plenty of headroom, nothing clipping, so that when vocals are recorded to this, the tracks will be optimized in terms of level. If you have a different engineer working on the full mix with vocals, they're going to have everything they need to work with to create the best possible master for the song. All right, y'all. So we took a look at some different plugin options as well as approaches for 3 essential processes for mastering your beats, which is optimizing the tone, utilizing a mastering grade EQ, getting that stereo width and that imaging to be exciting and welcoming, and then also utilizing a limiter or a maximizer to get the most loudness, but also retain the dynamics and get your beats to be able to compete. You know how to create headroom very easily. You don't need to worry too much about gain staging and all that with your beat mixes. If you're utilizing VCAs, it's very easy to just bring that down at the end or at the beginning. You saw how easy it was to create headroom. So I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions about mastering your beats, feel free to leave it below. If you learn anything in the video, please like, subscribe, and consider sharing. Hit that notification bell for more. We'll talk to you soon.